Book Nibbles, Big Ideas, Small Bites. Isabel Wilkerson's Caste. The Origins of Our Discontents invites the reader to see American history, and indeed the modern world, through a lens that is at once startlingly clear and uncomfortably intimate. She argues that the divisions we so often describe in terms of race are more deeply rooted in an invisible system of hierarchy, one that resembles in structure and function the rigid caste systems that have governed societies elsewhere. The United States, she suggests, did not merely suffer from racism as a set of prejudices or discriminatory acts, but built itself upon a caste structure that was carefully engineered, enforced with violence, and passed down across generations. To understand the persistence of inequality, the often irrational fervor of social boundaries, and the endurance of injustice, one must examine this hidden scaffolding of caste. With a storyteller's touch, she brings to life examples that draw from history, personal anecdotes, and comparisons across cultures, weaving them into a narrative that forces the reader to confront uncomfortable truths. Wilkerson begins with the idea that caste is not simply about hatred or personal animus, but about an overarching structure that assigns people their place before they are even born. In India, caste has long dictated the destiny of Dalits, deemed untouchables, regardless of their individual talents or character. In Nazi Germany, a racialized caste system divided Aryans from Jews, leading to unspeakable atrocities. In the United States, slavery and its aftermath constructed a caste pyramid with whites at the top and African Americans at the bottom, a hierarchy that endured even after slavery's abolition. Wilkerson argues that while the language and justifications may vary, the mechanisms of caste are strikingly similar. They rely on fixed boundaries, enforced by law and violence, and perpetuated by culture, custom, and fear. What makes caste so insidious is that it becomes nearly invisible, seen as natural or inevitable by those who live within it. To illustrate the point, she recounts her own experiences traveling abroad. In one instance, while attending a professional event in Germany, she was treated with a level of respect and curiosity that contrasted sharply with how she was often treated in the United States. German colleagues, aware of their nation's own horrific past, seemed committed to confronting it directly, memorializing the victims of the Holocaust and instilling in younger generations the gravity of what had been done. In America, by contrast, the legacy of slavery and segregation is often minimized or ignored, with monuments not to the victims, but to the perpetrators. This cultural amnesia allows caste to persist, unexamined and unacknowledged, even as it shapes lives in profound ways. Wilkerson identifies 8 pillars that undergird caste systems, a framework she develops through historical and contemporary examples. One pillar is divine will or natural order, the claim that the hierarchy is ordained by God or by nature itself. In the United States, defenders of slavery cited the Bible or pseudo-scientific theories of racial difference to argue that the subjugation of Black people was preordained. Another pillar is heritability. Caste is passed down through bloodlines, so one is born into a place and cannot escape it. For enslaved African Americans, even a child born to a white father and an enslaved mother inherited the mother's status, ensuring that the bottom rung reproduced itself generation after generation. Other pillars include notions of purity and pollution. The idea that contact with members of a subordinate caste taints or defiles those at the top. Jim Crow laws against interracial marriage, or the obsessive policing of public spaces to prevent Black people from using the same facilities as whites, echoed the strict separation of castes in India, where Dalits were barred from wells or temples. By laying out these pillars, Wilkerson shows that caste is not arbitrary, but systematically reinforced through religion, law, culture, and violence. She also explains how caste operates through what she calls the unconscious obedience to caste, a kind of script that people internalize. Individuals do not have to be consciously hateful to uphold caste. They simply act according to the roles assigned them. A white person who insists that a Black neighbor is out of place in their community may not see themselves as overtly racist, but they are enforcing the boundaries of caste nonetheless. Similarly, a police officer who disproportionately stops and searches young Black men may think they are merely doing their job, but they are perpetuating a system that assumes criminality at the bottom and innocence at the top. This unconscious obedience makes caste extraordinarily resilient because it does not rely solely on laws but on deeply ingrained habits of mind. Wilkerson's storytelling shines when she illustrates how caste plays out in everyday encounters. She recalls a dinner party where she was mistaken for help rather than a guest, a small but telling reminder of how assumptions about status persist. She shares the story of Al Bright, a 12-year-old African-American boy who, in 1951, was invited to a pool party in Ohio. When white parents complained about a black child swimming with their children, the lifeguards forced him to sit on a floating raft in the middle of the pool, where he was isolated and humiliated before being ordered out altogether. No one struck him or used a slur, yet the caste system was unmistakably at work, reminding him and everyone watching that he did not belong. Such stories, while painful, drive home how caste is maintained not just through dramatic acts of violence, but through countless daily indignities that reinforce boundaries. One of the most powerful parts of the book is Wilkerson's comparison of the American South under Jim Crow with Nazi Germany. She recounts how Nazi officials studied American racial laws in the 1930s as they crafted their own policies. They admired how the United States had managed to maintain a rigid racial hierarchy without constitutional challenges. Anti-miscegenation laws, one-drop rules defining who was black, and strict segregation were seen as models. In fact, some Nazis thought America went too far in its obsession with race, though they eagerly borrowed its techniques. By highlighting this disturbing connection, Wilkerson underscores how America's caste system was not only brutal domestically, but also influential abroad. It shaped the very ideologies that led to the Holocaust, a chilling reminder of how deeply embedded and far-reaching caste structures can be. Yet she also notes crucial differences in how Germany and the United States have confronted their pasts. After World War II, Germany engaged in a deliberate process of reckoning. Monuments to Nazi leaders were removed, Holocaust sites were preserved as memorials, and the nation made efforts to acknowledge its crimes. In the United States, however, statues of Confederate generals still stand in public squares, and the narrative of the lost cause romanticizes those who fought to preserve slavery. The result is a society that remains in denial, unwilling to fully acknowledge the caste system it built and the suffering it caused. This failure of memory allows the system to persist, morphing into new forms even after old laws are dismantled. Wilkerson also highlights how caste affects health and well-being. She cites research showing that constant exposure to discrimination and stress has measurable physical effects on the body. African Americans, for instance, often have higher rates of hypertension and other chronic illnesses, not solely because of genetics or lifestyle, but because of the toll of living in a caste system that devalues them. She tells the story of an accomplished Black physician who, despite his education and professional success, was repeatedly pulled over and questioned by police. The cumulative stress of such encounters wears down the body, a phenomenon known as weathering. Caste, then, is not just an abstract social construct, but a lived reality that seeps into the flesh, shortening lives and worsening health outcomes. Another poignant example comes from the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina. Wilkerson recalls how images of predominantly Black residents stranded on rooftops, begging for help, revealed the stark disparities of caste. Many of those left behind were the poorest, unable to evacuate, and the slow government response underscored how expendable their lives were seen to be. Media coverage often portrayed them as looters rather than victims, reinforcing stereotypes that placed them at the bottom of the hierarchy. Katrina, like so many disasters, acted as an X-ray of caste, exposing the bones of inequality that normally lie hidden beneath the surface of everyday life. Throughout the book, Wilkerson challenges readers to recognize how caste continues to shape politics, economics, and culture. She points to the election of Barack Obama as a moment that both inspired hope and provoked backlash. On one hand, it symbolized a crack in the caste order, proof that a Black man could rise to the highest office in the land. On the other hand, it triggered a surge of resentment among those who felt their dominance threatened, fueling movements that sought to reassert the old hierarchy. The election of Donald Trump she argues, can be seen as part of this reaction, a reassertion of caste anxieties in the face of demographic change. Caste, in this sense, is not static but adaptive, reshaping itself in response to challenges. Wilkerson's narrative is not without glimmers of hope. She emphasizes the possibility of empathy, of seeing the humanity in those whom caste has dehumanized. She tells the story of an airline passenger who, after initially bristling at sitting next to her, softened when they found common ground in conversation. She recalls her own friendships across lines of caste, forged through mutual respect and vulnerability. These moments, while small, suggest that caste can be challenged not only through laws and policies, but through human connection. Yet she is clear-eyed about the difficulty of dismantling such a deeply entrenched system. It requires not just individual goodwill, but a collective reckoning, a willingness to confront history honestly and to imagine a different kind of society. In drawing her narrative to a close, Wilkerson reflects on the metaphor of disease. Caste, she argues, is like a pathogen in the body politic, infecting generations and manifesting in recurring symptoms of inequality and violence. To heal, one must first diagnose the illness and then commit to the long, painful work of treatment. Ignoring it or denying it only allows it to fester. She urges readers to see caste not as someone else's problem, but as a shared reality that diminishes everyone. For a society that devalues some of its members ultimately undermines its own humanity. The work of dismantling caste is not charity for the oppressed, but liberation for all. What makes Caste so compelling is the way Wilkerson combines rigorous research with intimate storytelling. She does not simply present statistics or legal history. She brings the reader into the lived experience of caste. Through stories of humiliation, resilience, cruelty, and kindness, she paints a picture that is both sweeping and personal. Her comparisons across societies remind us that caste is not unique to America, but her focus on the American context forces a confrontation with truths many would prefer to avoid. She insists that we see the scaffolding behind the facade, the hidden architecture that explains so much of what we otherwise dismiss as individual prejudice or accident. As the book concludes, one is left with a sobering recognition of how deeply caste has shaped the United States. From the earliest days of slavery to the coded language of modern politics, from the health disparities that shorten lives to the monuments that still glorify oppressors, the signs are everywhere. Yet one is also left with a sense of possibility. If caste is constructed, it can be deconstructed. If it has endured because it was normalized, it can be dismantled if it is made visible. Wilkerson's contribution is to make us see, to pull back the curtain on the discontents that run beneath our national story, and to challenge us to imagine what might come if we dared to build a society without caste. Her work is not light reading. It demands that the reader sit with discomfort, with the recognition of complicity, with the grief of historical trauma. But it also offers clarity, a framework through which to understand the present and to chart a path forward. In the end, Caste, the origins of our discontents is both diagnosis and call to action, a reminder that while we are products of history, we are not bound to repeat it if we have the courage to face it squarely. It is a book that lingers, reshaping how one sees ordinary encounters, political debates, and historical narratives, reminding us that beneath the surface of American life runs a current as old as the nation itself, one we must confront if we are ever to be free. And that's it. Isabel Wilkerson's Caste, The Origins of Our Discontents. Thanks for listening to Book Nibbles. If you enjoyed this bite-sized book, don't forget to subscribe for more quick, insightful summaries. See you in the next nibble.